Imagine your team winning its first ever major trophy as Crystal Palace did in beating Manchester City in last season's FA Cup final.
So then it looked like they'd get their spot in next season's Europa League, but that dream could be ripped away before it even started. As the decision over their fate was delayed yesterday, the excruciating wait for both club and supporters goes on.
So, why are Crystal Palace set to miss out, and who is to blame? What's it got to do with Lyon's forced relegation in France? And are fans right to feel like UEFA are making a multi-club scapegoat of last season's FA Cup winners?
Plus, at Wimbledon, British qualifier Oliver Tarvet is into the second round. That's almost £100,000 of prize money, but why can't he keep it? And Jurgen Klopp has called the Club World Cup the worst idea ever implemented in football. But after the drama involving Manchester City, can he be right?
Welcome to the Sports Agents. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Gabby. How are you?
Good. We've come in. We haven't done it together in the studio
dressed
for a
in
while, and we've dressed the same.
Yeah, we're dressed in all black. We could be like mime. Could be like those puppet artists. You know.
Have they not told you? That's what we're doing later. So already I am totally in on Wimbledon. I think I watched a lot more yesterday than I was expecting myself to find time to, and of course listening to brilliant radio commentary of it as well, which I always enjoy. And
well,
you're gonna
have to tell me, because I played in a golf day yesterday.
Okay.
And then went to see Olivia Rodrigo. So,
of course you did.
So that's a normal day, isn't it, in the summer? So I haven't seen any of it.
Well, 7 Brits through from the first day. Record number of Brits through this year to the main draw anyway, for a very long time, since the 80s. And this story, Oliver Tarvet, is so interesting because he plays at San Diego University. He's on a tennis scholarship, as a lot of Brits do, go out to America. And because he's on a scholarship in America, he's an amateur. So he is not allowed to take more than £7,000 a year profit or prize money, and so he's already now guaranteed 99,000 because he's got into the second round, right? So he can use it for expenses potentially. So he's saying that he'll fly his coaches first class home, but hopefully he can, I don't know, pay his coaches in advance or something.
Yeah,
like give them a stipend for the next few years.
Is it the college that deems him the amateur, or Wimbledon? Because it's a
college. It's different with different sports.
Yeah, college sport is such a grey area, and it's been a real bone of contention for a lot of young athletes as they're coming through, which is, why do these colleges make so much money out of us and our ability?
Yeah, and that has been reviewed, hasn't it?
Yeah,
because American
and there's various agreements
football
now.
is different and basketball is different within the system. And as you know, whatever a college spends on its men's football, there is a stipulation it has to spend it on the women's side of that sport, So he said, though, I'm not here for the money. That could really set him up as a professional, couldn't it? And it's incredible to come through qualifying, which is very rare for a Brit anyway. They usually get the wild cards, and then to do what he did. At some point, though, it must be crossing his mind, ooh, maybe I don't go back to college.
Well, do you know? And the same thing happens in golf so much now. When the amateurs come into the majors, look, they're still way down the field, but when they arrive, be it the Masters or an Open or whatever, they arrive with such confidence and such competitive instinct already drilled into them because of the standard of college sport that they're playing. So whilst they're not professional in terms of,
they are in lifestyle.
They are in lifestyle and mentality a little bit.
Yeah, it's not
like
playing Wednesday afternoon sport at a British university and kind of. It's a very, very
and
different thing.
Always fancy dress on the coach on the way home with a crate of beer at the back. Is that not the same?
Not American college sport, no.
Well, I thought the away games I played at Bradford for Hull were typical of what they were going on. What was going on in America?
Really, really grateful to San Diego as well. He's talked so much about how they've been so amazing for him. So I don't know whether he'll decide it. But he's got Alcaraz, so maybe we don't need to worry about the third round. Although Alcaraz was a bit wobbly yesterday in his qualifying and was pushed. And there were so many great matches yesterday. Katie Bolter, of course, beating Paula Badosa as well on centre court. And our man Draper kicks off his ascent, his challenge today. So and imagine being out there. 41 degrees it was on court yesterday. What was your golf like? I don't mean your actual golf play.
My golf was actually quite good yesterday. it was hot, but the beauty of consistently hitting it in the trees is you find shade, so that's kind of good.
Is that your tactic?
That was my tactic. Obviously, you've got the Women's Euros coming up, and starting tomorrow, and England won their final friendly against Jamaica at the weekend, so we'll have plenty on the Euros. I would have thought over coming weeks. The Club World Cup trundles on but. I don't know how much you read Martin Samuel in the Times, right?
I do,
but he always writes articles that I don't always agree, but he always writes articles that makes you think. And he's actually defended this tournament right from the very start.
He wrote a big piece at the weekend. Didn't
Wrote a massive piece on it. And we've discussed it with Tim Vickery and stuff, that just because the Europeans view this in a certain way, as Jurgen Klopp has said, worst idea ever in football, other parts of the world view it differently. It's been a big thing for the Brazilians, and also now for Saudi Arabia as well, after what they did, Al Hilal did against Manchester City. The differing views around the world, I think, are really interesting.
I think the differing views reflect also the wealth in their countries in terms of their football wealth, and because there is so much money in this country and in Western Europe and Champions League countries, if you like, those top countries, it's seen as maybe something of a nuisance, whereas those other countries, their fortunes could change dramatically because of it. And also because of America being what it is, this cultural melting pot of fans from all around the world live there. So his defence as well was of the fans who are coming to support, the Brazilians who are coming to support, because there are so many communities in the States who have come out and just absolutely loved it. So he was trying to make us all a little bit less myopic, I think, wasn't he?
Absolutely. And on so much of it, I do agree with him. It just feels like for me it just feels like a tournament too much at the moment. But then and this isn't as a sort of Manchester United fan saying this, but the more the European teams don't actually have it all their own way, and you do get a result like Al Hilal, or you do get a result like Fluminense beating Inter Milan, the better that has to be.
Better probably for the kind of look of the tournament. But do you really think City were crying in their kind of cold Heineken beers later?
I think...
which beer sponsors it? I don't know.
Asahi.
Asahi, right, okay.
Which I do like an Asahi, but then from a football fan's point of view, you do start to do I keep going with that? Do I keep drinking that because they sponsor Adelaide? That was always the case. Like, would never drink Carlsberg because they used to sponsor Liverpool, or have a JVC video recorder because they sponsored Arsenal. Definitely.
And you never went in JD Sports.
No, always Dulux, not Crown. I could keep going.
I think it's interesting also where it's there's rumours it's going to be in Brazil next,
right?
But they're saying should it have a permanent home in the US? But also the challenges that have come through the weather and things in the US have been interesting, because Charlotte, where a lot of the problems have happened, is one of the cities for the World Cup next year. And a World Cup where you've got to kind of abandon play regularly for 90 minutes.
But it's a standard procedure at American sports events. There are obviously parts of that country where that weather comes in, and this has happened at Augusta several times. The weather comes in, they get a storm warning, and quite right, they sound the hooter, and everybody is off the course within 20 minutes. You can't. I know Maresca was angry about it, but you just can't have that risk.
No, it feels like when they sit down, I think a post-draw in December, and work out where everybody's going, you might find some of the lesser nations, shall we say, are playing their football in Charlotte. And as you say, big win for the Lionesses ahead of the Euros, and a big win for the under-21s as well. Lee Carsley's young men backing up what they've already done under his tutelage.
I'm so pleased for him after the year that he had, and how I think he was thrown under the bus a little bit by his superiors with how the whole England senior men's thing transpired. But he manages those group of lads really well, and that's back-to-back Euros wins. I'm so pleased for him.
And Tuchel's tenure is obviously a very short one, potentially, as England head coach. So, is he...
He has to be, doesn't he? He's now won back-to-back Euros, and he may feel more equipped in 18 months' time.
Interesting if Eddie Howe's name's still in the frame, then what he's doing with Newcastle, whether it'll be a battle between the two of them.
If they can sign any players, that's the big thing for Newcastle at the moment. Catch up with all episodes of The Sports Agents on Global Player, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe or follow, and don't forget to rate and review.
Next up, are Palace being used as a scapegoat by UEFA? We're going to speak to French football journalist Julien and Dan Cook, perhaps better known to many as HLTCO, the Palace Fans Channel. So let's bring in Dan Cook, who runs the HLTCO, Palace fan channel, and French football journalist and friend of the podcast, Julien, to discuss this story further, because we've heard of multi-ownership before in terms of how it's going to restrict clubs, and it doesn't seem to have restricted anybody to anything, does it, thus far? And then here we are, suddenly, Crystal Palace on the precipice of European football, having won a trophy for the first time in their history, and are they the ones that are going to be the fall guys? This must feel enormously unfair, Dan, at the moment.
I guess so. I mean, I'm always reluctant to use the word unfair because the people that I interact with on social media on a daily basis will just come back with me with, you shouldn't have broken the rules in the first place. And you think, well, technically, we haven't, if you want to actually get into the minute details of it. But looking for nuance across 280 characters is always a bit of a fool's errand, I think.
It is, but it must be frustrating. Let's go back to the kind of the way this story has unfolded. And if reading through kind of, as much as I have done, it feels like the administrative error, if you like, was not registering at the right time and kind of getting the paperwork in, because John Textor is the person who's kind of at the centre of this, isn't he, because of his multi-ownership. But he was trying to register this a few months after the date he should have done, obviously at a time when you didn't know you were going to go on and win the FA Cup.
Well, of course. I mean, so as far as I'm aware, 12 months prior to the current situation, which had the deadline at the 1st of March. Last year, the deadline for putting shares in blind trust was the 1st of July. I'm not quite sure why UEFA decided to change that deadline from the end of a season to the middle of a season. But from Crystal Palace's point of view, I've had a lot of people say to me on social media, well, you should have just done it as and when the 1st of March deadline came around. That there are multiple reasons why that wasn't done. Primarily, John Textor did not believe that he had what UEFA classes decisive control, because even though he owned 44% of the shares, he technically only had 25% voting rights, and the other 3 voting right holders at Crystal Palace all vote in a block and have done throughout their entire relationship with the club anyway. So it wasn't as though he could ever affect change in one direction. The other side to it is that Crystal Palace, obviously at that point, were only in the FA Cup at the round of 16 stage. We hadn't played Millwall in the round of 16 until the 1st of March. We then went on to beat Fulham, Aston Villa and Manchester City to win the FA Cup for the first time in our history. And Lyon only got into the Europa League on the last day because Le Havre scored a last-minute penalty away at Strasbourg. It's incredible, really, that people were saying we should have foreseen this, because I understand it on one hand.
His other club is Lyon, obviously.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he owns, so technically at this point in time as well, he has actually stepped back from being the head of Lyon anyway. So there is the potential that by the time the Europa League starts, Crystal Palace aren't allowed to participate, even though John Textor no longer holds shares in Crystal Palace because he sold them to Woody Johnson, and he is no longer the head of Lyon. So we would technically be punished because of a multi-club model where the man is not in charge of either club.
But a man who's not in charge of either club. And the reason Palace would be punished, in inverted commas, is because Lyon finished higher in Ligue 1 than that, and therefore Palace won the cup, and therefore the Ligue 1 finish takes precedence. That, of course, is if they're in Ligue 1, Jules, because then just to throw added, well, you could call it nuance if you're going to be kind, or added chaos if you don't want to be kind into all of this. Lyon have been demoted to Ligue 2 at the moment because of their finances.
Yeah, relegated last week on Tuesday to the second division, as you said. They've been warned before in November, where the French regulator that we have for French football said to John Textor, listen, your financial situation is so bad, you are too much in debt. We don't see any plan for you to be able to decrease that debt and find a way out of this. So if he stays like this, we warn you now, in November, you will be relegated come June when we see you again. So by then, you need to sort things out, basically. And John Textor thought, in a very John Textor way, that he had sorted things out, which obviously the John Textor way is not really the right way. So no, he didn't sort things out, or certainly not enough.
So Lyon obviously are appealing, as you say, and they want to be back in Ligue 1. Does Ligue 1 need Lyon?
Yeah, I think so. When you have such a big club, such a historical club, for them to be relegated like that for financial reason, one is it's a terrible look for the league and for Lyon in itself, and for people who, John Textor, who owns Lyon and everybody associated with that club. It's terrible for Ligue 1 at a moment where already the league is a bit struggling to sell their TV rights and to get that kind of momentum going. So yeah, it would be terrible. And they've lodged an appeal, as you just said. I think they will put another plan together for the appeal commission, and this time, hopefully, it's got better substance than what John Textor presented on June 26th, which was, I mean, we can go into details if you want, but ridiculous from an ownership point of view, really. So I think there's still hope for them.
Such as Jules, what was ridiculous about what he presented? Because, you know, we've had previous episodes on this pod where we've talked about really the chaos of Liga financially off the field because of collapsing TV deals and TV rights and the monopoly of, I know you're a Paris Saint-Germain fan, but the monopoly of Paris Saint-Germain and so on and so forth.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not an easy economic market that a lot of the Liga clubs are operating in. But what was so ridiculous about what he presented?
The one I prefer, the best one, I think, is that he also owns Botafogo as well as a bit of Crystal Palace and Lyon and Molenbeek in Belgium. So he said to the French regulator, listen, I'm about to sell 3 players to Nottingham Forest for a lot of money from Botafogo to Nottingham Forest. I will take that money and transfer it straight away from the Botafogo account to the Lyon account. And in that way, no money problems anymore. It's just easy. And that's what we're going to do. And the DNCG said, listen, John, this is not how it works. You just can't transfer money from one account. This is not your current account and your saving accounts. It just doesn't work like this. So he struggled a little bit to understand that. And I just think there's, you know, when he stepped down from Lyon, he said, there's a lot of things, I made mistakes and there's a lot of things I didn't understand on how European football in general and French football in particular was working. I just don't think it's even that. It's just common sense, really, that you can't just transfer money from one bank account from one of your club to another one.
Him as an individual, okay, maybe you haven't read the small print, but when you've got this much money invested, there are advisors and people around you who might look at the bigger picture and advise you. One of the things that potentially could help Lyon is that PSG, your club, have said that they want to help speed up Bradley Barcola's 50 million transfer. That's about 42 million quid to Lyon, and that money would be legally help, wouldn't it? That's fine.
Yeah, some of the installment that they were supposed to pay through the years of his contract, they could pay quickly. There's other things that they can do. Michelle Kang, who is a very smart businesswoman who is very much involved in women's football, especially both in France, in England.
Yeah, her London Lionesses have just got promoted to the WSL,
really well.
so she's going to be a big player here. Yeah,
and she bought the Lyon women's side of the club from John Textor a year ago or so, and doing really well there too. So she's now in charge, and I think she has a much better plan. And also, behind all of this, there's also Ares, which is the investment fund, the hedge fund that lent money to John Textor to buy Lyon, 425 million euros that he has to be paid before February 2028, with high interest of between 11 and 16%. And Ares are very much also involved in what Woody Johnson did in Crystal Palace, because Woody Johnson is very close to the Ares hedge fund, and is very much the Ares hedge fund who said to John Textor, listen, sell your shares to Woody Johnson, and then we'll get Lyon in charge, because you clearly can't run a football club right now. And that's also a reason why he stepped down completely and let Ares and Michel Kang in charge of Lyon, which I think really for the better, and same with Crystal Palace and Woody Johnson.
Although what you would say, Dan, is Palace on the outside do appear a well-run football club, but given the success that you've had, given you know, you've got a very good youth setup, you've had a very, very good director of football in Dougie Freedman, who obviously is no longer there, but everything has gone in the right direction for Crystal Palace.
I would suggest, and I appreciate it is slightly ambiguous, but this question mark over decisive control, the only thing or the only institution in football that John Textor has been involved in that hasn't gone completely the wrong way are Crystal Palace. Yeah. Therefore, if we're going to look at who's got decisive control of Crystal Palace, it's probably fair to assume it's not John Textor. So, and also, if you want to go down the other route, this deal with Nottingham Forest that John Textor is putting through, there is the potential scenario of UEFA letting Crystal Palace into the Europa League and Nottingham Forest immediately lodging an appeal against that because they want to be put in the Europa League in our place. But then you've got a scenario where John Textor is doing business with Nottingham Forest in a more open fashion than Lyon ever did with Crystal Palace. So even though you've got a percentage of the club that was owned by John Textor, if you actually look at the deals done between Crystal Palace and Lyon, the only piece of formal business ever done was Jake O'Brien sold to them, and he was a fringe first-team player who I don't believe ever actually played any Premier League minutes for Crystal Palace before going to Lyon. Other than that, there's been no formal business done whatsoever, which pales into insignificance compared to the amount of business that Marinakis and John Textor have done.
Yeah.
I assume Steve Parish and whoever else hires the lawyers at Crystal Palace are working overtime at the moment to prove to UEFA all of the things that you've just said in terms of who actually controls the club, because that's the nub of it, isn't it? Who is actually controlling the club?
Yeah, and I do genuinely believe that the conversations that Crystal Palace have had with UEFA have been quite constructive. You have to bear in mind, we don't have a history in European football, so they haven't come across us in any point, let alone recent years. And it is quite unique because you've got a scenario where John Textor did own 44% of the club but didn't have a controlling say. That doesn't feel normal. But if you actually look throughout the entire 15 years of Steve Parish's tenure as Crystal Palace owner, he has called the shots. When he brought in the consortium to take us out of administration, it was him who ran it. He has been that since the 2010 season. Even with Josh Harris and David Blitzer, two other Americans that came in 2015, they are very much silent partners who are happy for Steve Parish to be the one deciding on the day-to-day things. And that has been the case ever since. So John Textor came in, wanted to get over 51% so he could bring us into the Eagle Football Holdings model, was met with complete, apathy in that sense. And that's why he has ended up selling his shares, because it isn't something that is open to him. Thus, he doesn't have decisive control and never has had.
I mean, this situation, Jules, move away sort of from the French side, but, from you working on European football a lot, and you've worked with me and Gabby a lot on Champions League stuff. We have been here before with clubs. The two Red Bull clubs, Salzburg and Leipzig, Girona and Manchester City in the Champions League last year, Nice and Manchester United with Ineos's ownership there. We have been here before, and they've all got by.
They've all done what they wanted
to do.
They've all
done what they wanted to do, maybe with the odd tweak. I think two clubs have been blocked from the Conference League because of multi-club ownership. Drogheda United of Ireland and Donetsk Strada. I mean, when you look at those lists, you could argue that UEFA are happy eventually for it to be worked out if you're a big club or from a big country, and maybe not if you're a smaller club. A minnow.
Yeah.
If I was being cynical.
If you were being cynical, which
no.
Obviously. That's why I'm a bit surprised with all these Crystal Palace Lyon things, because as Dan just explained, it was pretty simple and pretty black and white. That John Textor has, despite owning 44%, just no involvement at all in the football club. He was there at the FA Cup final and then flew to be there for the last few minutes of the Lyon last game of the season in Ligue 1, and that's about it really. There's people like Crystal Palace who don't know who he is even. People who work at the club who's never seen him. So it was, if you compare it with the Red Bull Group, for example, or even Marinakis at Olympiacos and Nottingham Forest, where the guy is there all the time, he's clearly very much in charge. And to be fair to him, he did his blind choice before March 1st, and so I guess he did the right thing. But Dan also explained very, very well why for Crystal Palace it was not something that they had in their mind at the time. So I think UEFA were very, very, very difficult on this one. And that's why I think at the end of the day, I think Lyon could well stay up in Ligue 1 and both of them will be in the Europa League next season.
Dan, I guess this also, a decision on this and some kind of clarity is going to be really important in terms of players you might retain and players who might be attracted to come if they've got the prospect of European football next season.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You've got a situation at the moment where Mark Gay obviously has just under a year left to run on his deal now. And we may well decide that we don't want to cash in our chips on him because he's our captain and we're going into a European campaign. As you've just highlighted, there is still ambiguity as to whether or not we're going to be involved in Europe at all. Abir Eze is being linked with moves to Arsenal at the moment and Spurs potentially. He has this release clause. I'm not suggesting that being in the Europa League is the be-all and end-all for a player like Eze, but it would make a difference. You've got transfer business that needs to be done. Oliver Glasner spoke at the back end of last season about wanting our transfer business done promptly because it didn't happen the year before. And this has put us in an enforced state of limbo. Even if you look at the statement from UEFA yesterday, they've said they're delaying a final decision over our involvement in it because of this DNCG appeal. I understand that from a litigation perspective, because obviously they would rather not go into a court of arbitration for sport issue, but it doesn't help us. We're in a situation where we're trying to plan for next season and we don't know what our budget is, whether we can say we're in Europe. I mean, there is the potential that we get put down in the Conference League, but having won the FA Cup, the most prestigious domestic cup competition in world football, I think it's fair to say, for the first time ever, it would feel like a real kick in the teeth to be chucked out of that.
These things, Dan, you talk about it affecting just net. These are the kind of decisions, actually. This decision affects kind of medium to long-term planning as well, doesn't it? Because you keep Eze and Eze signs a new deal or whatever, or Mark Gay goes, do you know what? I'm going to stay for my final year. It's a World Cup year. I want to play regularly. These decisions have a knock-on effect not only for next season, but 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Well, I think as well, I mean, you've already mentioned that UEFA or whoever the powers that be might, look more favourably on historically bigger clubs. With Crystal Palace, it has always felt, even more so in recent years, as though you are butting your head up against the glass ceiling, because the idea of winning a domestic cup was just something I never even contemplated. We got to the final in 16 against United and we lost that. Every year it gets harder. So for us to go through in the fashion that we did, against all the odds really, going to Fulham in the quarter-final, going to take on Aston Villa, a Champions League knockout team in the semis, beating Manchester City with a clean sheet in the final, it was like a fever dream in and of itself. To then have that taken away from you would just reinforce that feeling for everybody, from the boardroom to the players, to the coaches, to the fans, that it isn't for us. And I understand that people will say, well, you should have got your house in order. But as I've tried to explain, and hopefully I've done a relatively decent job today, we didn't have a crystal ball. There is a higher chance that the two clubs wouldn't have been in the same competition, at which point it's not relevant. And if the DNCG's original decision is upheld, it would still not be relevant. And you're still looking at a situation where potentially, as I mentioned, John Textor is not in control of Crystal Palace or Lyon by the time the competition starts, and we're not allowed to play because of it.
I guess you can't really answer the question, where this leaves multi-club ownership, Julien, but it would look like a situation that may force UEFA into an absolute position on this, so that there is clarity and people, aren't able to kind of slip through loopholes. Bigger clubs kind of seem to be able to work their way around the situation, don't they?
Yeah, you're right. I think for a long time they closed their eyes and just allowed the City Group to do whatever they wanted and buy the clubs they wanted in Europe. Same with Red Bull, all around the world. And then maybe now they're actually changing a little bit their side and thinking, well, we can't let that happen. Although again, this is a very different. I feel the Palace and Lyon dilemma, if you want, or situation is very different to a lot of the other multi-club ownership.
I don't think, Jules. I think from what I agree. I don't think many people, if people are asked to put the multi-club ownership,
feel anything like it.
No, I don't think anybody.
Effect, it feels like a unique, but they all, they can all argue their unique situations, can't they? But yeah, this doesn't feel like.
It doesn't seem a lot of interaction between his multi-club,
which
his
is why,
various
going
clubs.
back to the very first question to you, Dan, was it feels a bit unfair, doesn't it? When you've done, as you've said there, you've smashed your head against the glass ceiling. You finally got through it. You've had your glorious day at Wembley, and we're looking forward to the European lands to come. And those trips to Europe on a Thursday night. And here we are in July, and you're not sure whether to book the tickets.
No, I mean we can't, and also, not that it matters, because the normal average fan on the street who's a neutral will just say what they've said to me and every other Crystal Palace fan all summer. Well, you should have got your house in order. But if you do look at like Marinakis, for example, the Olympiacos Forest thing is cut and dried. He runs both clubs. John Textor has never been in control of Crystal Palace and never would have been, which is why he sought to sell his shares at the start of, the season just gone anyway. If you go back to March, with the initial date for putting shares in Blind Trust, he was in active conversations with different consortiums, one involving Jason Kidd over in the NBA. There have been all sorts of different people that have potentially tested the water. This is a man who tried to buy Everton about a year ago. That by definition shows that he wasn't invested in Crystal Palace in an emotional sense, because he was trying to buy a direct competitor. So when we say he had no direct control and people come back with, but he owned 44% of the shares, it's so reductive that it feels incredibly frustrating.
Does Woody Johnson, by buying that 44% stake, does he still only get 25% voting rights?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
He is basically there for the ride, really.
Right.
I think he understands that Steve Parish calls the shots, and he is happy to just be there, be involved in Premier League football and put money in where he needs to. But, because he's, in a cookie-cutter sense, taken John Textor's shares, he has the same voting rights.
Right. I'll tell you what, if John Textor comes near your club,
No, he's not. He's not welcome at all.
Tell you what, Woody Johnson will bring you all sorts of funny games as well, but that's for a different podcast as well.
That's for a different day.
If you talk to New York Jets fans, blimey,
as a
good
neutral,
luck.
And as somebody who's not going to come at you on social media, I think it does feel unfair, and I hope you do get your position at the European table somewhere next season.
Well, I appreciate that, Gabby.
And I do as well, Dan. Sorry, just so I don't.
Chappers doesn't.
All of a sudden was aware of saying goodbye. That made me feel like the bad guy there. I do as well, Dan. Jules, I'll come for you on social media, obviously.
Of course.
Thank you very much, guys. So, Ian Poulter and his son Luke are both qualifying in a tournament together to try and get into the Open.
Yeah, they're in the same qualifying
he's
tournament.
21 years old, Luke, isn't he? I think?
Yeah.
And very, very good by all accounts.
Well, it's a bit like when you see Tiger Woods or something, and you sort of think, I can see where he's got that from, really.
Yeah.
But they're in competition with each other, aren't they? If you take LeBron, who's just signed a new contract at the Lakers, which takes his career earnings to, I think, just under $600 million.
Wow.
I think. Anyhow, but by signing that contract, going into his 23rd NBA season, he'll continue to play with his son Bronny.
Yeah, and I mean, there are lots of father-son kind of dynasties, if you like, over sports, but there are very few where they actually cross over. I think there was one game where Owen and Andy Farrell played together at Saracens, and there've been, obviously a few. Ida Gudjonsson and didn't he hand over?
Yes,
his
did he?
dad,
Yeah.
I think when they were playing for Iceland, they kind of like he came on for him. Which I mean, that's rare in football to have.
We would have had. Ashley Young and his son, who was at Peterborough.
Yeah, that's right, in the FA Cup.
In the FA Cup third round.
But he was benched, wasn't he?
Yeah, so that didn't happen.
Yeah. So it doesn't happen as much, perhaps, in this country, in kind of the team sport arena, that they would be in the career at the same time. Golf's slightly different, isn't it? Because you could play well into your 40s, obviously. So we've had a listener question on this, Helen, and she says, what sport would you compete with your children in?
I don't know what
is that with the aim of winning? Because I know.
Well, it gets harder and harder. I mean,
I would definitely fancy my chances against 6'6", 120 kilo Ruben on a bike. I feel like if I can't beat him up.
Let's do this climb, shall we?
Yeah.
I find increasingly I lose at everything now.
Yeah,
so I reckon when I was facing I would always bat 10 or 11 when I played cricket, but by the time my son got to 12 or 13. I couldn't really see the ball when I was batting again. I was a terrible batsman, so I couldn't see the ball when he. So now at 22, nearly 23, I've got no chance of seeing the ball when he bowls. 2 daughters, netball again, no chance. We do like a round the clock training drill, the 3 of us, and I'm always last in that.
Tennis. I fancy myself at tennis. Maybe
tennis a bit. Tennis. My 17-year-old joined us for paddle.
Yeah.
But it was the first time she played, but I was better than her at that. What I need to find is sports that I've done a little bit that they've never done, and then I'll beat them. Tennis is a good one, actually.
Yeah, because I deliberately kept them away from tennis, so I would dominate. Let us know what sport you'd play against your kids, or maybe your parents, or any thoughts on what we've talked about today. Get in touch via email at thesportsagents@global.com or on our socials.
Catch up with all our episodes on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe or follow.
And of course, rhythmic gymnastics.
You'd absolutely.
Especially Ruben, I'd hope to beat him in that.
Batter Ruben at rhythmic gymnastics. You'd be very annoyed if you didn't, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
If he caught that ribbon better than you did, you'd be fuming.
I'd get Lee Mack along to judge. We'll be back on Thursday.
The Sports Agents.
With Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.